Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Preeti Kaur. Coming up in the next 30 minutes. Trump says US is going to further come down heavily on Iran and it will be over pretty quickly, while Iran guards say they will determine the end on 11th day of the conflict. Oil prices continue to swing widely. Trump weighs steps to ease oil prices, including Russia sanctions relief. G7 decides on necessary measures at emergency meeting. Indian government directs oil refineries to increase LPG production, sets up committee to review allocation for hotels and industries. US designates Afghanistan as a state sponsor of wrongful detention, demands that Kabul release all US citizens detained, could ban US travel to the country. US President Donald Trump stated on Monday that the US will intensify actions against Iran and would go further and further, while assuring that military operations would end very soon, helping stabilize turbulent markets amid the escalating West Asia conflict.
We could call it a tremendous success right now as we leave here. I could call it, or we could go further, and we're going to go further. But the big risk on that war has been over for 3 days. We wiped them out in the first 2 days.
Following the appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei, son of assassinated Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as Iran's new supreme leader, Tehran unleashed missile and drone barrages on Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Israel and even Turkey, intercepted by NATO defenses. Iran maintains the Strait of Hormuz blockade, halting most tanker traffic and driving benchmark crude to highs before a partial retreat. Wall Street turned positive on Trump's short-term excursion remarks after over 5,000 targets were struck. France is leading defensive efforts to reopen the vital choke point post-conflict peak, while Russia has vowed unwavering support to Iran amid regional rallies and intensifying Hezbollah clashes in Lebanon. Meanwhile, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, has declared that Iran alone will determine the end of the ongoing war, rejecting US President Donald Trump's claims of imminent victory and demands for unconstitutional surrender. Brigadier General Komars Haidari, Deputy Commander of Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, warned that if US and Israeli attacks persist, Tehran will block even 1 liter of oil from leaving the region. He vowed unrelenting retaliatory strikes and designated all American military bases across West Asia as legitimate targets, signaling Tehran's resolve to impose its will despite heavy losses and the prolonged regional crisis. In response, US President Donald Trump issued a forceful warning on Truth Social, threatening that any Iranian action to halt oil flow through the Strait of Hormuz will trigger an overwhelming American response. He stated that Iran would be struck 20 times harder than the previous attacks and that the United States would destroy easily destroyable targets to render Iran's rebuilding virtually impossible as a nation. Trump described the potential devastation as death, fire and fury, while expressing hope that it would not occur. He framed the US military capability as a gift to China and other major oil importers reliant on the strait, urging appreciation for America's protective role amid the escalating West Asia conflict. Israel announced on Tuesday that it had destroyed an Iranian missile launcher minutes after Tehran launched a fresh barrage that activated air raid sirens across multiple Israeli regions. The Israeli Defense Forces reported successfully intercepting most incoming projectiles late on Monday, with no casualties reported. In response, Israeli warplanes carried out a precise strike on the launcher responsible for the attack. The incident followed Israel's second large-scale assault on Tehran earlier on Monday, described by the IDF as a broad wave of strikes targeting Iranian military infrastructure amid the intensifying West Asia conflict that began late in February. U.S. President Donald Trump, as per latest reports, is considering a special operations mission to capture Iran's stockpile of near-bomb-grade uranium, citing 3 diplomatic sources familiar with discussions. The plan targets roughly 200 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, only a short technical step from weapons-grade material currently stored in an underground facility at Isfahan. International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi confirmed on Monday that the Isfahan site appears largely undamaged despite weeks of intense U.S. and Israeli airstrikes. G7 meeting of finance ministers held a meeting to discuss the possibility of a joint release of emergency oil reserves. Following the meeting, France's finance minister Roland Lescure said that G7 is ready to take all necessary measures to stabilize energy markets. Lescure further said that for the moment, there is no problem with oil or gas supply, whether in Europe or in the US.
I want to be very clear today. The oil market and the gas market as well is being affected by disruption, mainly linked to the fact that oil and gas exports leaving the Middle East are heading to Asia, a region therefore directly impacted by market upheavals. Today, there is no problem with oil and gas supply, whether in Europe or in the United States. Nevertheless, we will look closely at how we can stabilize all flows, the entire market, and I repeat, by examining all measures, including, if necessary, the release of strategic reserves.
G7 finance ministers have discussed the release of emergency oil reserves, but the use of this strategic option will depend on market developments, German Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil said in Brussels on Monday.
You saw the French declaration that we are now also keeping open the option of drawing on national oil reserves. Now is not the right time, but we, including Germany, are open to doing so in a coordinated process at the appropriate time.
European finance ministers were closely monitoring oil prices on Monday and were actively considering measures to mitigate any impact on their economies. Greek finance minister and president of the Eurogroup, Kyriakos Pyrakakis, said at a news conference. Speaking after the Eurogroup meeting of finance ministers in Brussels, European economic advisor Valdis Dombrovskis said that G7 energy ministers stand ready to release strategic oil reserves, while president of the Eurogroup, Kyriakos Pyrakakis, said that they are closely monitoring market reactions towards the development in Middle East.
We're closely monitoring market reactions to the developments in the Middle East. This is what dominates international headlines. The European economy has the capacity and the resilience to absorb temporary shocks, but at the same time, we must be prepared for a more prolonged period of instability with potential disruptions in shipping, increases in energy prices, and implications for inflation.
After the meeting of Eurozone finance ministers, Dombrovskis said that G7, the United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, Italy, Germany and France were in agreement to coordinate their actions on oil. European Economic Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis warned against easing sanctions on Russia.
It's important that we do not now ease the pressure on Russia and do not help Russia to fill its war chest using this situation of elevated oil and gas prices right now. So that's why it's important that we stay the course with our sanctions, implementing the G7 price cap, moving towards maritime services ban. And we had a discussion indeed on U.S. positioning on this, and also U.S. is broadly aligned with this approach, and they were emphasizing what they were discussing in the case of India being, so to say, very much contained both in terms of time and scope of the measure, so they do not expect substantial impact of this on Russian oil revenues.
Iran launched fresh strikes on energy installations in the Gulf on Monday, including a petroleum complex in Bahrain, as oil prices soared on fears over supply disruptions due to the Middle East war. Bahrain's sprawling Al Mamir oil facility was hit, causing a fire and damage, with the country's state-owned energy firm Bapco declaring full majeure. This is the latest Gulf producer to activate the legal clause. Energy producers in Qatar and Kuwait earlier made similar declarations, which are a warning that events beyond their control may lead them to miss export targets. Bapco Energy's Kingdom of Bahrain's integrated energy company declared force majeure situation on the group's operations. The company stated in a statement that it hereby serves notice of force majeure on its group operations, which have been affected by the ongoing regional conflict in the Middle East and the recent attack on its refinery complex. Oil prices fell on Tuesday after hitting their highest level in more than 3 years in the prior session, as U.S. President Trump predicted the war in the Middle East could end soon, easing concerns about prolonged disruptions to global oil supplies. Oil prices surged past $100 a barrel on Monday, hitting session highs of $119.5 for Brent and $119.48 for WTI, their highest since mid-2022, as supply cuts by Saudi Arabia and other producers during the expanding U.S.-Israeli war with Iran stoked fears of major disruptions to global supplies. Prices later retreated after Russian President Vladimir Putin held a call with Trump and shared proposals aimed at quick settlement to the Iran war, according to a Kremlin aide, easing concerns about a prolonged supply disruption. Gulf oil producers have begun cutting output as the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran disrupted shipping in the region. Over the weekend, Iraq slashed production at its main southern oil fields by 70% to 1.3 million barrels per day, while Kuwait Petroleum Corporation also began reducing output and declared force majeure. Adding to the cart, Saudi Arabia has now begun trimming production, sources said on Monday. Amid ongoing West Asia tensions affecting global fuel supply, the Indian government has instructed oil refineries across the country to increase LPG production. The Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas announced on Monday that the additional output will be diverted to meet domestic household demand and help stabilize supply in the coming months. The ministry has prioritized domestic LPG supply to households and introduced 25-day inter-booking period to avoid hoarding or black marketing. Non-domestic supplies from imported LPG is being prioritized to essential non-domestic sectors such as hospitals and educational institutions. For LPG supply to other non-domestic sectors, a committee of 3 executive directors of oil marketing companies has been constituted to review the representations for LPG supply to restaurants or hotels or other industries. Meanwhile, Donald Trump on Monday said that he had a very good call with Russian President Vladimir Putin about Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East. Trump added that Putin wants to be helpful with the Iran conflict.
I had a very good call with President Putin. We had a lot of people on the line from our side, from his side. We were talking about Ukraine, which is just a never-ending fight. And look, there's tremendous hatred between President Putin and President Zelensky. They can't seem to get it together. But I think it was a positive call on that subject. And we obviously talked then about the Middle East. And he wants to be helpful.
As per the Kremlin foreign policy aide Yuri Yoshakov, the two leaders spoke for about an hour after Trump initiated the call. He said that Putin shared proposals aimed at reaching a quick settlement to the conflict involving Iran during the conversation.
A full conversation took place this evening between the presidents of Russia and the United States. Donald Trump called Vladimir Putin to discuss a number of extremely important issues related to the current international situation. The focus naturally was on Iran conflict and on the US participated trilateral talks on the Ukrainian settlement. I should say straight away that the conversation was substantive, frank, and constructive, as is usually the case in the dialogue between the Russian and US leaders.
Деловой, откровенный.
Further, he also mentioned that Trump shared his view of the situation, particularly regarding the ongoing US-Israel military operation.
России высказал ряд соображений.
The Russian president set out a number of considerations aimed at the swift political and diplomatic settlement of the Iran conflict, taking into account the contacts held with leaders of the Persian Gulf states, with Iran's president Pezeshkian, and with the heads of several other countries. In turn, the US president gave his assessment of developments in context of the ongoing US-Israel operation.
Развитие ситуации.
Shifting focus on Cuba, on which President Trump has said that the Caribbean nation would have to make a deal in a friendly takeover or face an unfriendly takeover of its communist regime. Speaking at a news conference on Monday, Trump said Havana is in deep trouble on a humanitarian basis and that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is dealing with the issue, which may or may not be a friendly takeover.
He's dealing, and it may be a friendly takeover. It may not be a friendly takeover. It wouldn't matter because they're down to, as they say, fumes. They have no energy. They have no money. They're in deep trouble on a humanitarian basis.
Trump argued that Cuba had depended for decades on Venezuela's aid, which has run dry after U.S. capture of Nicolas Maduro to face narco-terrorism and trafficking charges. While the Cuban government has said that it is not in any high-level talks with the United States, but has not outrightly denied press reports that U.S. officials may be in informal talks with Raul Guillermo Rodriguez Castro, the grandson of former Cuban President Raul Castro. You're watching Detained Live. We're heading for a short break, but after the break, voicing concern on safeguarding economic rights of landlocked Afghanistan, India comes down heavily on trade and transit terrorism in a veiled reference to Pakistan at the UNSC. National Intellectual Property Awards and IP Conference held in National Capital, rewarding remarkable contributions in innovation. It's a do-or-die match for Indian Eves. Indian women's football team face a must-win clash against Chinese Taipei in AFC Women's Asian Cup.
Jharkhand will mesmerize you with majestic nature, rich heritage and colorful culture.
Johar.
Johar. It fits perfectly.
Thank you.
Full workout ho gaya.
Ready?
Postcards from Jharkhand on National Geographic.
Welcome back. After the break, you're watching Detained Live. US has censured Afghanistan over its detention of American citizens, a move that could lead to a ban on US passport holders traveling to the country. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a statement that he was designating Afghanistan's Taliban government as a state sponsor of wrongful detention, demanding that Kabul release all US citizens detained in the country, including Mohammad Habibi and Dennis Coyle. He added that Taliban continues to use terrorist tactics, kidnapping individuals for ransom or seeking policy concessions. Now, these despicable tactics need to end. The Secretary of State also said that he had concluded that it was not safe for Americans to travel to the country because of the risk of being unjustly detained. Meanwhile, UN Security Council meeting on Afghanistan was held on Monday, where US Ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, said that the international assistance to the country should be evaluated given Taliban intransigence and also its exclusion of the female population from basic rights. He noted that the budget for the United Nations assistance mission in Afghanistan, the mandate of which is up for a renewal next week, is the largest of any special UN mission in the world.
In light of the Taliban's intransigence, we must carefully evaluate the utility of international assistance and engagement in Afghanistan. UNAMA's budget is the largest of any special political mission in the world, even after a reduction in its 2026 budget by 15%. This council must consider carefully the funds we collectively provide for this mission's budget when the mission's female national staff are not even able to go into the office to work.
India's ambassador to the UN, P. Harish, also spoke at the UNSC meeting on Afghanistan. He strongly criticized what he termed as trade and transit terrorism in a veiled reference to Pakistan, as he urged the international community to safeguard the economic rights of landlocked Afghanistan. The envoy shared that unhindered trade and transit are essential for Afghanistan's economic recovery, warning that obstructing these channels amounts to economic coercion against a vulnerable landlocked developing country.
The Secretary General's report also expresses deep concern at civilian casualties caused by cross-border armed violence. We reiterate and support the Secretary General's call urging compliance with obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, and ensuring protection of civilians. India strongly condemns the airstrikes on Afghan territory, which are flagrant violations of international law and the UN Charter and the principle of state sovereignty. It's hypocritical to espouse high principles of international law and Islamic solidarity on the one hand, while mercilessly carrying out airstrikes during the holy month of Ramadan that have killed 185 innocent civilians as of 6th March, around 55% of whom are women and children, and displaced over 100,000 according to the UNAMA on the other. We also reiterate a grave concern on the practice of trade and transit terrorism by denial of passage for trade and the cynical closure of access for a landlocked country. UN declarations on LLDCs sound hollow in the face of such actions. The trade and transit vulnerabilities of LLDCs should not be weaponized.
Union Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal on Monday addressed the National Intellectual Property Awards and IP Conference at Bharat Mandapam in the national capital. He congratulated the awardees for their remarkable contribution to innovation and strengthening India's IP landscape. The minister then emphasized the importance of encouraging and inculcating the spirit of inquiry from a young age and the inspiring rise in women participation in the IP ecosystem, which continues to strengthen government's resolve towards Atmanirbharta or self-reliance. He also added that youthful energy of the youth of the country has the potential to drive innovation and achieve wonders.
It's that young, youthful energy that our school children have, that our college-going children have, that we need to tap, that we need to encourage to explore the unexplored, to navigate uncharted territory, uncharted waters. It is at that age where they have the ability to think out of the box. And if we can, for example, we are setting up 50,000 new Atal Innovation Labs in schools that were announced in the budget. I think these are efforts to build that culture of innovation or that openness in mind at a young age that we from the government side are trying to do.
And now we turn focus to business. US AI company Anthropic sued the Trump administration, alleging retaliation after it refused to allow its Claude AI model to be used for autonomous lethal warfare and mass surveillance of the Americans. The lawsuit, filed in federal court in San Francisco, challenges the government's decision to label Anthropic a national security supply chain risk, a designation that blocks Pentagon contractors from using its technology. Anthropic says the move is unlawful and threatens the economic value of one of the world's fastest-growing AI companies. On to sports now. Indian women's football team will face a must-win clash as they take on Chinese Taipei in their last Group C match of the AFC Women's Asian Cup in Sydney on Tuesday. The women in blue still have a chance to make it to the quarterfinals should they defeat Chinese Taipei by a margin of 2 goals or more, and if Japan defeats Vietnam on Tuesday in the simultaneous kickoff. India are currently at the bottom of the group at the 4th place with 0 points from the 2 matches after having lost against Vietnam and Japan. Chinese Taipei, on the other hand, have a much easier task. A draw will be enough for them to seal progress to the knockout stage. India's top doubles player Yuki Bhamri and his Swedish partner Andre Göransson had an easy day, winning in straight sets against David Pell and Fabrice Martin at the Indian Wells Masters. The unseeded Indo-Swedish pair won 6-1, 6-3 as they broke the French-Dutch combo 5 times in the opening round. Bhamri and Göransson served 5 aces to 3 of their opponents. Pell and Martin served 6 double faults in the 66-minute contest. They will next face giant-killing team of Sander Aarons and Gilles Lecker, who knocked out second-seed British pair of Julian Cash and Lloyd Glasspool. That's it in this edition of DD India Live, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those of you on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on the DD India mobile app. Now, this app is available on both Android and iOS platforms, and you can download the respective QR codes. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Preeti Kaur signing off, and from all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching DD India Live.